we'll be exploring Sangiovese in an Australian and also in an Italian context. The first wine right up there is La Prova Sangiovese from the Adelaide Hills 2022. This is what we have in our glass. David, you've been a follower of Sam Scott's excellent work. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, well, Sam Scott with his La Prova label makes 5 or 6 different Italian varieties, and I guess his skill is that he's got benchmarks. He knows the Italian ones, and I'm determined that those varieties that have been grown for hundreds of years back in their homeland do serve as a model for us, and we should never get too far away. So Sam does that, but he certainly brings perfect, really intense winemaking to do this, and so he makes a Sangiovese that really is a crossover between the Italian, the need for tannin, and acid in the wine, but also a wine that's fruity but savoury for food. So he captures that at good money, and is one of probably 4 or 5 top makers of Sangiovese in Australia. It's a variety that does travel. It does travel to all parts of the world, and always presents with at least one characteristic. Some people call it red plum, some people call it cherry. You find it in every type of Sangiovese on every soil and from every maker, unless they've completely overrun the wine with another variety or too much wood. But here we've got a wine mostly made in stainless steel, expressing itself as Australian Sangiovese.
Well, I must say I'm more in the cherry camp. So for me,
Yeah.
Sangiovese is all about like those crushed cherries, cherry juice, beautiful salivating wines. So next up, Italy and
Well, it brings us
Chianti.
to Chianti, doesn't it? Yeah.
Two different expressions of Chianti, and my immediate question is, are all Chiantis equal?
Yeah, well, Chianti is a number of concepts within Tuscany. Everybody knows Tuscany in central Italy, with its capital of Florence. Immediately, as soon as you get out of the suburbs of Florence, you come to Chianti country. And in its first instance, Chianti is this big pear-shaped zone that takes up about a third of Tuscan landmass, but within it is Chianti Classico, which we're going to have a look at specifically in a minute, but also a series of other small zones that take the name Chianti Colli Fiorentini. In other words, this one's Chianti from just the eastern side of Florence, the hills, the Colli of Florence, Chianti Colli Senesi from the hills of Siena, the next major town after Florence, other wines known such as Carmignano. But I guess it's fair to say that probably 90% of all the serious wines, the wines of repute that fetch the big dollars, come from Chianti Classico. Mm-hmm. But it does pay to explore and have a look at other zones, because this is one of, I've got to say, my favourites. It's a very pretty style of Chianti. It's only a few minutes out of the eastern side of Florence, past Bagno a Ripoli, and you come to the appellation, the DOCG, if you like, of Chianti Colli Fiorentini. To me, a variation on the cherry theme. It has this lovely, elegant cherry skin sort of character. Mm-hmm. And Chianti, I guess, doesn't have the talk about it, that we do about Burgundy and about the Nebbiolo wines, Barbaresco and Barolo. But it is unfolding for people now that the wines are being made more classically and less interventionist. And what I mean by that is less new, there's less Cabernet, less New World, less new techniques like oak. They're going back to trying to make wines that speak of where they come from.
Yeah, now they also have official sub-regions or UGAs, which is a step towards the Barolo Barbaresco model as well, and it also just highlights the change of mindset that vineyard and grapes come first, and the winemaking techniques second.
Yeah, there was that period that we've already spoken about, the Super Tuscan period, where they brought huge attention to the wines of this area, but it was in a sense at a cost. they changed the nature of what were the wines ceased to be native, I suppose, in the sense that they were using new oak and ripeness and introduced varieties like the French Cabernet, for example, Merlot and even Syrah, to change the nature and make them more international. You're referring to the wines beginning to return, or returning fairly determinedly to wines of terroir, wines of place.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a very serious Chianti bracket. You could definitely see that different manifestations of Sangiovese as a grape variety. And after a slightly more structured and darker expression of Chianti Classico, I think now we really arrived in the premium, the most premium expression of Sangiovese, Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, and of course Brunello di Montalcino.
Yeah, Vino Nobile di Montepulciano is a wine that's really needs more attention by people. It's somewhere between Chianti and Brunello, literally, in the way it manifests itself. I think it's very important. Its best wines are certainly at least the equal of the very best Chianti Classicals, and they do have this beautiful personality about them. To me, it's almost like Sangiovese from Coonawarra or Margaret River, the best areas for Cabernet in Australia, making the most important and elegant but reasonably forceful wines. So not to be confused with Montepulciano, the variety from further over to the east coast, the Adriatic coast of Italy. Vino Nobile di Montepulciano refers to the hilltop town of Montepulciano, one of the really interesting detours you should make as you're travelling through the southern Tuscany. If you're going from Florence to Rome, go and have a look at Montepulciano. You can actually see Lake Trasimene from a cafe at the top of the hill in Montepulciano. Lake Trasimene, the site of one of Hannibal's greatest victory over the Romans. But we're talking about wine, and this is this lovely, elegant style of Sangiovese. So this is from 70% Sangiovese or more. For a long time they were allowing, they still allow other varieties like Cabernet and Merlot and that sort of thing, but there's less reliance on those and more on the local varieties like Canaiolo to make a more traditional, authentic wine. But I guess it brings us to Brunello di Montalcino, the major manifestation of Sangiovese.
Yeah, perhaps the purest expression, because unlike everything else we tasted, Brunello di Montalcino is the only Sangiovese dominant appellation that requires its wines to be made from 100% Sangiovese.
Yeah, they got to that after a little bit of near bloodletting in the from about 2008 onwards. The authorities raided a few producers here and said, guys, you've gone way too far. You're putting too much of other varieties in the wines and passing them off as Brunello di Montalcino. The specifications for Brunello di Montalcino are still Sangiovese. Stick with that. They nailed a couple of hides to the fence, if you like, and the local producers decided that they would all just go back to saying Montalcino should express Sangiovese, and it's a very individual, very distinctive type of wine. We fancy, I think Marcel's the same as me, we'd fancy to pick them in tastings reasonably easily.
Yeah, although unlike you, I do have sometimes trouble distinguishing very high quality Brunello from a Barolo.
Yeah. Well, there's one thing. There's one thing that Brunello di Montalcino reds have, and it's a stocky character. It's a meat stock or a porcini stock character that marks itself as it makes itself distinctive from the Chianti wines. So, when people are having competitive tastings and trying to trick you, they'll put a couple of Chiantis in and maybe they'll put a Barolo in. And the Brunello di Montalcino does always come out, I think, partly because of its extra structure compared to the Chianti wines, and partly because its tannins are not going to be as vigorous at all, as vigorous as the Nebbiolo wines. So the feel of the wine as it finishes, the way the acid and the tannins work in a savoury but more gentle way, is its giveaway.
Yep.
But they are capable of a complexity, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Of making you go back to the glass time and time again and say, "Gee, what's that? What's that?" The complexities and the way they wave and swirl are what excites us about great wine, and Brunello is one of them, one of the great 5 or 6 wines of the planet to us.
Yeah, and just looking at this Bertimali 2018, it keeps giving and unfolding, and all these layers are just getting more and more generous and more interesting. 2018 is such a beautiful vintage. Beautiful, elegant wines, but there's a lot of substance to it as well.
Yeah. It was a vintage, particularly some American wine writers talked down way too hard. Or Marcel and I, for example, with a wine writer, Ken Gargett, were here in October. And we purposely asked producers, even though they were beginning to move on to 2019s, which are being released now, we purposely wanted to look at 2018s all the way, as many as we can. And we looked at lots, probably bringing for me the total to 70 that I've looked at now. And I regard it as a potentially great vintage. Even though the wines are more elegant, not as forceful, everything about them is fascinating. And they've got length and width, but in a more elegant package. Certainly 2018 Brunellos are worth finding.